Welcome to your own channel, Whispers in Deadlight. New chilling, horror, creepy encounters, ghost stories videos are waiting for you. Please subscribe this channel, so you never miss a moment of the darkness. Now let's begin with story number 1. It was a cold and stormy night when I returned home from work. In recent years, peace had been scarce in my life, and a few months ago, I had gone through a divorce, which had forced me to get used to being alone. My house was a void of silence, and every day passed between work and video games. This night was no different. After returning home, I went straight to my computer and began playing my favorite games. The sky had turned overcast, and the weather reports were warning of a storm and snowfall in the area. But this was nothing unusual. It happened every year, and I had learned to ignore it. Around 11 p.m., while I was engrossed in the game, a loud crash startled me, like something heavy had fallen on my roof. The whole room shook. I immediately took off my headset and strained to listen for any sounds coming from outside. The howling wind, combined with the creaking of the house's roof, was all I could hear. I turned back to my screen and typed to my friends that something weird was happening, but before they could reply, a red notification popped up on my screen, and everything went black. The computer, the lights, and even the faint sound of air moving through the house all stopped. My home was plunged into complete darkness. I fumbled for my phone, turning on its flashlight, and made my way upstairs, hoping to find some explanation for the sudden power outage. When I opened the door to the upper floor, I saw nothing but the thick snowstorm outside. The wind was so strong that I could barely make out anything in the distance. I checked my phone again and sent my friends a message, telling them I wouldn't be able to game tonight. That's when I noticed something strange. A WhatsApp message had appeared from an unknown number. The message read, "There's been a complete power failure in your area, and it will take some time to fix." The odd thing was that the number had no identity, and it didn't seem like an official company message. I felt a chill run down my spine. This message didn't make sense. I decided to head upstairs to grab my emergency battery pack to at least have some light. As I climbed the stairs, I heard something strange behind me. A faint sound, like footsteps, slow and deliberate. I stopped and turned around, but there was nothing there. The sensation of being watched crept over me, my heart pounding in my chest. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the storm's effect, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Reaching the top, I grabbed the battery pack, and just as I was about to head back down, I heard it again, those footsteps. Louder now. Closer. I hurried back downstairs, clutching the battery pack, my hands shaking. As I switched on the lamp, the house seemed to breathe in silence, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something. I tried to power up my computer, but it kept shutting down. The frustration and unease only grew. It felt as though the house itself was working against me. Time seemed to stretch out. Hours passed, and the storm outside raged on. I had decided to step outside to see if anyone else had lost power. When I opened the door, a blast of icy wind hit me square in the face. The street was barely visible through the snow, but I could see some houses still had lights on, which made me wonder how it was possible for them to have power while my whole block was out. Just as I was about to close the door and go back inside, I heard a sound. It was coming from the stairs. It was unmistakable. Someone was walking up the stairs. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The noise grew louder, each step drawing closer. I walked toward the stairs, my breath catching in my throat. When I reached the top, I saw that the door to the room was open, something I was sure I hadn't done. I quickly shut the door and locked it, my mind racing. The sound of footsteps was louder now, closer still. It was as though someone was standing right behind me. I stepped back, my pulse quickening, and moved towards the next room, the one where I kept my emergency supplies. But as I stepped forward, I heard something else, a voice. It was low and almost imperceptible, but it was there. A whisper, soft yet chilling. "You can't run." I didn't stop to think. Panic surged in me, and I bolted toward the door. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. Before I could even finish dialing, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't the usual polite knock of a visitor, It was urgent, loud, insistent. My hand trembled as I held the phone, but I couldn't speak. My throat felt dry, and all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. The knocking continued, growing louder with each passing second. I dared not answer. I knew something was out there, someone. Suddenly, there was another noise. A scraping sound, like nails on wood, coming from the other side of the door. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Whoever was on the other side knew I was in there. They were trying to get in. The door rattled again, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the lock. But I hadn't given anyone a key. I looked around frantically for something to defend myself with. My hands landed on a lamp, and I held it tightly, ready to swing it at the intruder. The knocking stopped, but I could still hear something. Soft breathing, as if someone was standing just outside the door. The sound of the door rattling again was enough to send me into a panic. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone. I knew I needed help, but I wasn't sure how to explain what was happening. Without thinking, I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice came through the line. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house. I think they're trying to break in, I whispered, my voice trembling. Please, hurry. Stay calm. We've got officers on the way. Stay inside and don't open the door. I hung up, feeling a small sense of relief. The police were coming. But as I listened to the eerie silence, I realized that even with their help, I wasn't sure if I would be safe. Just then, the knock came again. It wasn't a polite tap, but a loud, deliberate bang. I froze, my heart pounding. Whoever it was wasn't going to give up. I dialed the police again, my hands clammy. Please, hurry. The police arrived shortly after, and the officer knocked loudly on the door. It's the police. Are you all right? I didn't hesitate. I swung the door open and rushed into the arms of the officer. We've checked the house, the officer said, his voice stern, but we didn't find anyone. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was short-lived. The officer continued, but your phone, it's been tracked. The message you received wasn't just a random glitch. Someone knew exactly where you were. I stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. What does that mean? It means someone had been watching you, he replied grimly. Later that night, after the police had gone and I was left alone in my house, I sat in the dark, trying to process everything that had happened. A thought suddenly crossed my mind. The message. The unknown number. It all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. The intruder hadn't just been trying to break in. They had been tracking me. They knew when I was home. They knew when I was vulnerable. The next morning, I called the phone company to investigate the strange message I had received. The operator told me that the message had been sent from a private number, a burner phone, which meant it could have been anyone. Anyone who had been watching me for days, weeks, maybe even longer. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't safe. Not in my own home. I didn't wait around to find out what would happen next. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and left the house. The fear that had been bubbling under the surface exploded, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the person who had been watching me was still out there. I drove aimlessly, not caring about where I went, only knowing that I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't go back. As I sat in the parking lot of a nearby cafe, I received a final message from the unknown number. Next time, I won't be so kind. I stared at the screen, my heart racing, and I knew that I would never feel safe again. The person who had stalked me, who had known everything about me, was still out there, and they were coming for me. And the worst part? I had no idea who they were. It was supposed to be just another camping trip, something to unwind and reconnect with nature. There were 3 of us, me, Mark, and Emily. We were all in our late 20s, lifelong friends who had grown up together, but now, with life moving faster than we'd expected, we needed a break. A real break, from work, from the city, from everything. None of us had ever gone camping so deep into the woods before. We were used to the usual weekend trips, but this time, we wanted more. After some research, Emily found a spot deep within the Swiss Alps, a place so secluded that only a handful of people had visited. The perfect setting for an unforgettable adventure. As we packed our gear, excitement buzzed in the air. It was early in the morning when we set off. We drove through winding roads, the landscape changing from the bustling city to quiet, green hills. The further we went, the more we could feel the pulse of the earth beneath us, as though we were entering another world entirely. After hours of driving, we reached a point where the road was blocked. A fallen tree lay across the path, and the car could go no further. Mark, ever the adventurer, said, "Looks like we're walking the rest of the way." It wasn't a huge inconvenience, so we grabbed our bags and set off on foot, our spirits high. The forest around us was thick, too thick to see through properly. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the faint sound of birds echoed above. We walked for what felt like hours, each step taking us deeper into the forest, away from civilization. The path, though uneven and rocky, was beautiful in its isolation. Nothing but nature surrounded us, no signs of human life, no cars, no houses. Eventually, we reached a small open field on top of a hill. The view was breathtaking, rolling hills below, surrounded by trees as far as the eye could see. It felt like we had stumbled upon a hidden paradise, a place untouched by time. We decided to set up camp right there. Mark pitched one tent while Emily and I handled the fire. Soon, the smell of roasted meat filled the air as we made dinner. Everything was perfect. We ate, laughed, and talked about old times. The evening was peaceful, the only sound being the crackling of the fire. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, something started to feel off. It wasn't immediately noticeable, but there was a shift in the air. The temperature dropped abruptly, and the forest became unnervingly still. The usual sounds, the chirping of insects, the rustling of leaves, had stopped. A strange silence enveloped the area. As the last bit of light from the setting sun faded, we settled around the fire, trying to ignore the strange atmosphere. We joked about ghost stories and paranormal encounters, trying to lighten the mood, but Emily kept looking over her shoulder, her eyes darting toward the trees. She said, "I don't know. I just feel like something's off." Mark, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's just the woods, Em. Nothing to worry about." We all tried to laugh, but the laughter felt forced, hollow. That's when we heard it, the first strange sound of the night. It started faint, like a distant whisper, and then grew louder. At first, it was hard to place, but then the unmistakable sound of laughter reached us. It was low and guttural, like something straight out of a nightmare. The kind of laughter you would hear from someone who wasn't quite human. We froze. Emily's face paled. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. It came from deep within the forest, but it wasn't a sound made by any human. It echoed through the trees in a way that sent a shiver up my spine. Mark squinted into the darkness. "There's no one else out here," he said. "We're the only ones for miles." The laughter stopped as abruptly as it had begun, and for a moment, the silence returned. But this silence wasn't peaceful. It felt oppressive, like something was watching us, waiting for us to make the next move. As the laughter faded, we sat in the darkness, unsure of what to say or do. The fire crackled softly, but its light seemed to do little to dispel the shadows that stretched far into the woods. The wind picked up, howling through the branches, sending a chill through the air. We tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. But it was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made our hearts race. It was as though something was moving just outside the circle of light cast by the fire. "Let's just get some sleep," I suggested, my voice more nervous than I intended. We retreated to our tents, but sleep didn't come easily. The feeling of eyes on us persisted, even in the relative safety of our tents. I tossed and turned, trying to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But every creak of the tent, every breeze that slipped inside, felt like a warning. That's when I heard it again. The laughter. This time, it was closer. I bolted upright in my tent, my breath shallow and quick. Emily's tent was just a few feet away, but I could barely make out her figure through the fabric, her silhouette shifting nervously. Mark's tent was further off, but the silence between us now felt far too heavy. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The fire was still burning, though it had dwindled to a faint glow. My eyes scanned the surrounding darkness, looking for any sign of life. The laughter, soft and cruel, came again. This time it was right behind us. My heart thudded in my chest as I spun around, but saw nothing. It was as if the sound had materialized out of thin air, drifting from the trees like an echo from another time. "Mark," I hissed, my voice barely a whisper. "Emily, something's out there." Mark and Emily both emerged from their tents, their faces pale, eyes wide with fear. The laughter was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. But something wasn't right. The trees seemed to loom over us, as though they were closing in. I felt as though the woods were alive, watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. And then we saw it. At first, it was just a flicker, a movement in the shadows, too quick to fully grasp. But as I focused, I saw it more clearly. A figure, tall and thin, moving between the trees. Its shape wasn't human, not entirely. The way it moved was unnatural, like it was floating just above the ground. The figure paused for a moment, and I swear it was looking directly at us. "Did you see that?" Emily gasped, clutching my arm. Mark had his flashlight in hand, but when he shined it in the direction of the figure, it vanished instantly. Nothing. Just the trees, swaying gently in the wind. We stood frozen, hearts hammering in our chests. "That was real," Mark muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. There was something out there. But the woods remained still, silent, as though nothing had happened. But we knew better. Something was out there with us. We gathered our things, our nerves fraying. The fear that had been building in us for hours reached its peak. Emily's hands shook as she packed her bag, but she couldn't stop looking over her shoulder. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "We need to go back to the car. Now." Before we could respond, we heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming closer. They were slow at first, but then they quickened, growing louder. Someone, or something, was following us. We ran. The sound of our own footsteps echoed in the stillness of the forest as we sprinted through the underbrush, our flashlights illuminating the dark path ahead. But the footsteps didn't stop. They grew louder, closer. Something was chasing us. We ran for what felt like an eternity, the forest closing in around us. The path became more difficult to navigate, branches scratching at our faces and hands as we pushed forward. The footsteps were now almost directly behind us, and the sound of breathing, shallow and labored, filled the air. Suddenly, Mark stopped. "This way," he shouted, pointing to a narrow path that wound through the trees. We turned and followed him, desperate to escape whatever was stalking us. But the path didn't lead us to safety. Instead, it seemed to lead us deeper into the forest. And then we saw it. Through the trees, a faint glow flickered. It wasn't the usual flicker of fireflies or distant lights. It was unnatural, like something out of a nightmare. We ran toward it, hoping for something, anything, that might help us escape. As we neared the light, we found it emanating from an ancient tree. Its gnarled roots twisted and intertwined, creating a hollow space beneath it. The roots seemed to open into an ancient, hidden path that led into the earth. The glow was coming from this strange opening, casting an eerie light on the surrounding trees. Without a second thought, we rushed toward the light, our instincts pushing us forward, desperate to escape the growing sense of dread that threatened to overwhelm us. The footsteps were still behind us, but they had grown quieter, almost as if the presence that had been chasing us was retreating, or waiting for something. I could hear Emily's breath coming in sharp gasps, and Mark's footsteps were heavy with panic. The light from the tree seemed to beckon us, like a sign of hope in the otherwise suffocating darkness. We reached the tree, and without questioning it further, we crawled under its roots, into the narrow path beneath. The air inside was thick with the scent of earth and decay, but it was strangely comforting, as though the forest itself was shielding us. The path led downhill, and we descended into the earth, the light from the tree growing dimmer behind us as we moved deeper into the unknown. The narrow tunnel opened up into a small underground cavern, dimly lit by the glow of something strange in the far corner. We stood at the edge of the cavern, hesitant but compelled to move forward. The walls of the cavern were lined with strange symbols and markings, some of which looked ancient, others more recent. It was as though this place had been here for centuries, yet still felt alive. We stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what we were seeing. "What is this place?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, though the answer felt obvious. "But whatever it is, it's not something we were meant to find." The air grew colder as we stepped further into the cavern. The strange light that illuminated the room seemed to come from a stone in the center, pulsing faintly. The closer we got, the more unsettling the energy felt, as though we were disturbing something ancient and powerful. But before we could get too close, we heard it. The sound of footsteps again. Not just behind us but all around us. Slow, deliberate steps, as if something or someone was circling us. I turned to Mark, my heart pounding. "We need to get out of here. Now." Panic set in as we turned to retrace our steps, but the path we had entered through was no longer visible. The tunnel that had brought us into the cavern had disappeared, replaced by a wall of dense, inky blackness. The symbols on the wall seemed to twist and writhe, as though alive, and the ground beneath our feet seemed to shift. The footsteps were louder now, and in the dim light, shadows began to stretch unnaturally long. A cold wind whipped through the cavern, though there was no source for it. Emily screamed, her voice echoing in the cavern. "What is happening? What is this place?" Mark grabbed her arm, pulling her toward him as he stared frantically at the shadows. "We need to find a way out. We can't stay here." But the shadows had already begun to move. Something was emerging from the darkness, something tall and thin, its form shifting and warping as though it didn't quite belong to this world. It was the same figure we had seen earlier, though now, it was far more distinct. Its eyes were two black holes, voids that seemed to absorb all the light around them. The air grew heavier, and the temperature dropped even further. The figure stood motionless, as though it were waiting for something. I could feel my legs shaking beneath me, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The figure didn't move, but it felt as though it were watching us, studying us. The silence that surrounded us was suffocating, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward us like fingers, ready to drag us into the darkness. Mark, usually the calm one, was visibly trembling. "We need to go. We need to run." But where could we run? Every direction seemed to lead to more darkness, more shadows, more things that weren't human. I reached out instinctively, trying to grab Emily's hand, but before I could, the figure suddenly lunged forward, its body bending in unnatural angles. A guttural, inhuman voice echoed from it, though its mouth never moved. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice rasped, a cold chill settling over us. Emily screamed, her voice high-pitched and frantic, as she turned to flee, but there was nowhere to go. The walls of the cavern seemed to close in on us, and the shadows surged forward, blocking our path. I felt the grip of cold fingers at my throat as I was pulled backward, the air sucked out of my lungs as I was dragged toward the figure. But then, just as suddenly, everything stopped. The shadows receded, the figure froze in place, and a deep silence enveloped the cavern. For a moment, I thought we were trapped in some sort of nightmare, unable to escape. And then, the ground beneath us gave way. I don't know how long we were falling. It felt like hours, though it couldn't have been. We tumbled, disoriented, the ground below shifting unexpectedly as we struggled to keep our balance. The air was thick, heavy, and the strange energy in the cavern was overwhelming. But then, as quickly as it had started, the fall ended. We landed in a heap at the edge of the forest, the cool night air hitting our faces. The stars above were clear and bright, the familiar constellations comforting in their presence. We were no longer in the cavern, no longer surrounded by shadows, no longer trapped. We were outside, in the open air, back in the world we knew. The fear didn't dissipate, though. It clung to us like a second skin. We stumbled to our feet, looking around. The forest was still dark, but we could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the soft sounds of nature that had been so absent earlier. The pressure in the air had lifted, but the horror of what had happened still gripped us. "I think we're safe," Mark said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know how, but we're out." Emily was shaking, her face pale as she clung to me. What just happened? Was that real? We didn't have answers. But we didn't care anymore. We just needed to get out of there, away from that cursed place. We made our way back toward the car, the long walk through the forest feeling longer than it ever had before. When we finally reached the road, the car was there, just as we'd left it. We piled in, started the engine, and didn't look back. We left that place behind, but not the memories. The laughter, the shadows, the thing we'd seen in the trees, it was all still fresh in our minds. It was as though something had followed us, something that had been waiting for us to find it. As we drove away, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if we hadn't left. If we had stayed any longer, would we have been consumed by the forest? Would one of us have become part of whatever was out there, lost to the shadows forever? We didn't speak much during the drive back. The silence between us was filled with a quiet understanding. Whatever it was that we had encountered in those woods, whether it was something supernatural, something otherworldly, it had changed us. We were no longer the same people who had left for a simple camping trip. When we finally reached civilization again, it felt like we had escaped from a nightmare. We didn't tell anyone about what had happened. Who would believe us? And even if they did, what could they do? We never camped again. Not like that. We never ventured into those woods, or any other place that felt like it had been untouched by time. And when friends talked about their own camping trips, we would warn them to avoid the mysterious corners of the world, those places where the darkness waits for the uninvited. Because some things are better left undiscovered. The winter of 2020 was harsh, colder than I'd ever experienced, but for some reason, I felt a strange urge to leave the city. At 25, I had just settled into a new town for work, and life was a blur of endless tasks. I needed a break, something to clear the fog from my mind, to remind myself what peace felt like. It was a Saturday morning when I decided to pack up my car and head toward the unknown. I didn't know where exactly, just somewhere quiet, historical. A place where I could breathe. I found a small village marked on the map, the kind of place you pass by without a second thought. The drive was long. The landscape was a vast expanse of barren fields, empty roads, and silence. I passed by deserted farms, their wooden fences long worn by time. The road stretched on forever, the wind howling in my ears. Something about it was unsettling. There was a stillness in the air, almost unnatural. Yet, I couldn't pinpoint why it felt so wrong. By late afternoon, I reached the village, a sleepy, isolated place far removed from the bustling city. It was exactly what I had in mind. The place looked untouched by time. There was a corner store, a few houses, but not much else. And then I saw it. A small, faded sign reading, "The Old Corner Inn." It looked ancient, like something straight out of a forgotten era, with peeling paint and a sagging roof. I hesitated for a moment. Was this really the right place? But I was too tired to care. I just needed to rest. So, I parked my car and walked inside. The door creaked as I stepped into the inn. It was small, dark, and smelled of old wood and dust. The air was thick, heavy, almost as if the building had absorbed all the years it had lived. Behind a worn-out desk sat an elderly woman, her frail hands folded in front of her. She looked up at me with a tired gaze, her eyes a faded blue. "Checking in?" she asked in a voice that cracked like a twig snapping underfoot. "Yeah, just for the night," I replied, feeling an odd chill run down my spine. Without saying another word, she handed me a key. It was old, the metal tarnished, and the tag was handwritten in ink. "Room 2, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than was comfortable, and for some reason, I felt like she wanted to say something important, but chose not to. I nodded and made my way to the stairs. The second-floor hallway was dimly lit, the flickering light bulbs casting long, strange shadows on the walls. The whole place seemed to be holding its breath. When I reached my room, I took one last look down the dark hallway. The woman was still sitting behind the desk, her gaze never leaving me. I shook off the unease and stepped into the room. The room was simple, nothing special. A single bed, a chair by the window, and an old dresser. The walls were bare, and the only light came from a dim lamp on the nightstand. The bed was surprisingly comfortable, and after a long drive, I was too tired to care about anything else. I unpacked my bag, laid down, and pulled out my phone. Maybe a few videos would help me unwind. I found a quiet, calming podcast and closed my eyes, letting the voice wash over me as I drifted into sleep. I woke suddenly to a loud banging on the door. My heart shot into my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The knock was so forceful, so urgent, that I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't just a knock, it was a demand. I shot up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest, and rushed to the door. I swung it open, but the hallway was empty. No one in sight. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped out into the hallway, looking both ways. Nothing. No sounds. No footsteps. I looked back down at the lobby, but everything appeared normal. The elderly woman was still sitting behind the desk, staring straight ahead. I returned to my room, locked the door behind me, and tried to shake off the unsettling feeling that gripped my chest. Just as I was starting to calm down, the knock came again. This time, it was even louder, more insistent. It rattled the door frame. My heart skipped a beat. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was there. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door again, but once again, there was no one. My mind raced as I stepped back into the hallway, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Nothing. I walked back to the front desk, hoping for some explanation, but when I reached the lobby, the woman looked up at me with a blank expression. Her lips were pressed tightly together, as if she knew something I didn't. "No one has been here," she said with a soft, chilling tone. "I heard someone knocking," I said, my voice trembling. She just nodded slowly. "You're the only one here tonight," she repeated. I returned to my room, still unsettled. My mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. I locked all the windows and checked the door again. It wasn't possible. There had to be an explanation. But the strange feeling wouldn't go away. I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched by something, or someone. I lay back in bed, trying to distract myself with my phone. But as the screen lit up, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure. Standing in the corner of the room. Tall, dark, and motionless. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. It was tall, too tall for a normal person, and its features were obscured by the darkness. My mind raced, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Was I dreaming? Was I imagining it? My breath came in short, shallow gasps. Then, without warning, the figure stepped forward. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its movements were unnervingly smooth. I scrambled out of bed, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I reached for the door. But before I could open it, I heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and growing closer. I bolted out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. I just ran. Down the hallway, my feet slamming against the creaky floorboards, my pulse racing. I made it to the stairs and nearly tripped as I descended into the lobby. The elderly woman looked up in surprise as I burst through the door, my face pale, my chest heaving. But her reaction was strange. She didn't seem scared or confused, Just resigned. As if she had been waiting for something like this to happen. Before I could say anything, the man appeared. He was tall, just like the figure I had seen in my room. His face was obscured, but his presence was suffocating. The air in the lobby seemed to change. The room felt colder, darker. I could hear the pounding of my own heart, a constant thrum in my ears. The elderly woman's hands shook as she reached for the phone behind the desk. She dialed 911 without a word, her fingers trembling as she pressed the buttons. And then the man stepped forward. I don't know why, but I turned to run. But he was faster. He bolted past me, out the door, and into the night. No words. Just action. The police arrived soon after, their flashing lights cutting through the darkness. They conducted a quick investigation, but there was little they could do. The cameras in the lobby had only caught glimpses of the man, but there was no real footage. No sign of how he got in, or why he had come. The elderly woman told the officers that I was the only guest, but they didn't seem convinced. No one had any answers. I left the hotel that night, my hands still shaking. The man's intentions were unclear, but I had no doubt that something sinister was at play. I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had followed me. As I drove away, I thought about what could have happened if I hadn't escaped. If I had stayed in that room, if I hadn't run, what would have become of me? I'll never forget that night. What if I hadn't left? What if I had stayed there? I couldn't shake the feeling that it could have been the last night of my life. But, as I thought about it, I realized something. I had been saved. Whatever dark force was in that hotel, whatever malevolent presence had been waiting for me, I had been protected. It was in that moment that I understood. No matter how much we think we control our fate, it's not us who decide. It's God. His mercy is greater than any danger we face.